Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you. Hello and welcome back for the recap of Season 3 of It's Not About the Money. Andy, it's good to be here.
It is so good to be here. I've been looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while since we've been recording. We have been up to a lot of other fun things.
And recording for the next season.
That is true. Recording for our next season.
Yep. So this was a good one.
This was a great one. I was looking back over some of the people that we had the opportunity to talk to and the things that they shared. Wow.
So good. And I know we're biased, but there are so many good moments. I think we'll just have time for just a few quick highlights.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe let's kick off the episode with just kind of like moving through the season with some highlights and thoughts. Then I have some fun stats.
Great.
And then where we're going from here, information.
And if people are interested in learning more, of course, there are the recap episodes. So there's no real reason for us to get into super detail.
Right.
But I'm also wondering, like, maybe this is somebody's first episode that they're just jumping into for It's Not About the Money.
Right.
Like,
and welcome.
That could be super strategic.
Yes.
Just to kind of get a little glimpse of where you want to dive into deeper back in the season.
Mm-hmm.
How clever of them.
How clever of you. All right. Let's take it from the top.
Let's go. Yeah. So Drew Remke.
Started off Season 3.
Church partnerships. So he talked about the value and the role of the local church because there is no way that a nonprofit, an NGO, can possibly prepare missionaries for everything they will encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Training for the field, honestly, can take a lifetime.
Yeah.
And church leaders are positioned to know, whether it's a life group leader or a pastor, to know a member's state and preparedness. But more than that, I would say, and Andrew would say, they have the time that is required to pour into the development and the shepherding of somebody before they're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a critical thing. There's no way a sending organization has the margin to do that. We can't expect that of them.
Yeah. I really appreciated about our time with Drew, just the vision he cast for how the entities involved in sending someone can really work together and partner in that and not be, stepping on each other's toes, but really be in alignment and working together. This is currently the end of 2024, and I'm aware that there are just so many factors surrounding church membership and being part of the church and the local church and all these things. And I just really appreciated the vision that both he and Corey cast for the relevance of the local church and just some of the design and the strength that comes in having that kind of support.
And if you're a new believer and you haven't really put down roots in a local church, it's not to say that you're out of luck completely, but I think the highlight is we just can't expect an organization to have that much margin before they mobilize somebody. And I think, like, conversely, on the other side, you can't really expect a church to continue to carry the load of shepherding somebody when they're not in their midst.
Right.
And they don't have, there's time zones, they're, 12 hours, 13 hours, whatever, apart. Once somebody's fielded, it's kind of less reasonable to expect that home church to continue.
Yeah. Overall, and I just really enjoyed Drew. He was a super cool guy and thankful for that conversation.
Yeah.
But I also, not trying to move on too quickly if you had something else to say, but I just loved the episode with Spencer and Annette Nickel. They were so fun. Did. Yes, a lot of people did.
Yep. Spoiler right there.
Yeah, and I think it's because, they spoke to something that sadly a lot of people experience, rejection.
Right. So many can resonate with that.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you haven't listened to that, they talked about kind of wading into fundraising for the first time without much or any really family support.
Yeah, and actually, not even just a lack of support, but the presence of
active opposition.
Right. Active opposition.
Right.
I think the episode is called, Why Don't You Get a Real Job?
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of feeling like they were almost like heaping shame on the family name.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because they come from a kind of a majority white American background. But a lot of those same themes seem to come up in some of the miniseries episodes that we talked about with diverse populations.
Yeah. But you know what a couple of things that really just still stick with me from that episode are? The first is that they literally needed a new car and they got a $40,000 check in the mail. I think of that all the time.
Unbelievable.
I know.
Yeah.
And stuff like that happens all the time, but every
buy a really
time.
nice car for $40K.
Yes, you can. Yeah. The other thing that really stands out, do you remember how they have a file folder full of the things they remember that God has done for them?
That's a great idea.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a really great idea.
Really good. Yeah. And I think also what stood out to me is like, how do we deal with people in our lives who really have the wrong idea about fundraising? People who see it like you're taking some kind of shortcut or just like straight up mooching off of people. And so if that's somebody that, if this is something that you're dealing with, listener, that's a great episode.
Yeah, it is.
Dive into.
And you know, actually, it's interesting that you say that and even use the word mooching because I had a conversation this year with a friend that shared with me. She was like, you know, Heather, honestly, I kind of struggle when it comes to personal support raising because my husband had a member of their family that kind of did that kind of just lived on the family in a way where there were questions about their character and questions about like the way that they spent it. And so I think there's actually really, unfortunately, stories like that out there.
Yeah. That's unfortunate. There are a few bad eggs that kind of poison the watering hole.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they also, at the end, kind of had some great thoughts about maintaining compassion and a healthy perspective and focusing on all the other people in their lives that really were being supportive and realizing that God can and often does work good out of those hurtful interactions and relationships.
Yeah.
Like that's not beyond his redemption.
Right. It's not wasted
at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to what you said, Andy, I think it's just really important to remember that when you experience rejection or it seems like you're receiving opposition, that's not happening in a vacuum. There's a reason. And we find that a lot of times people are actually doing it in what they think is love, right? There's something that has conditioned them or formed them to respond in that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not love, right? Sometimes it's
fear or
and
whatever.
Or some other broken thing, but there are oftentimes stories behind that. And so I think if you're able to, you know, release expectation, have compassion, and maybe even be curious, it can actually even turn around, you know?
And not assign that interaction to yourself as part of like, I'm not worthy.
Right.
So maybe I should reconsider based on these people's reactions and don't try to like read the Lord's will into what they think about this.
Yeah.
So then we had Dr. Jolly.
Dr. Jolly. Yep.
Such a great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I've heard from a few people that got the planner and have really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if you didn't hear that episode, he talked about making time for reflection, evaluation, intentional planning. These are things I think we know we should do, but we don't take the time to do it.
Or don't have good systems.
Yeah. That's probably a better way to say it. And so he's come up with some great systems.
Yep. Yeah, I enjoyed that episode. And my husband is actually an avid user of that particular planner. And so I've seen firsthand how it can be a real help.
Yeah. What's some anecdotal evidence that how has it kind of changed things for Joel?
So I would say, you know how I think he calls it the circle of a thriving life. And it basically allows you to just kind of capture how you have moved towards kind of investing in these different spheres of your life, you know, work, family, and I can't remember the third one, if it's God or like self. Yeah. But it just kind of allows you to see at a glance your investment in different spheres. And as you know, with the way that Joel uses it, I think it's just like a quick glance of like, ooh, I actually didn't really invest in that area very much. That's why I might be feeling this way about it. Or conversely, I'm really proud of the steps I was able to take toward investing in that area. And it's just kind of a tangible way to capture, I did make movement on that, or I didn't make movement on that, which I think has just been helpful for him.
So I think sometimes the magnitude of an objective can just, speaking from personal experience, can just lead me to like, I'm not going to try.
Yeah.
And so I liked that he seemed to like dispel the notion that if I'm going to improve something or accomplish something new, I need to spend time working on it every single day.
Right. Or that it has to get to a certain point for me to be proud of my investment.
Right. When in reality, you can just set aside a little bit of time every week or even like every other week, and that's sufficient to get it done over time.
Mm-hmm. And really, the power in just doing a little bit and not maybe, going for all of it at once is building habits really is such a gift, right? If you can build a habit, if you can just kind of do the smallest thing consistently, you are going to have good results.
What is that quote? And I think Mary Valloni says this, and we have her on the season next year. Coming up. She says something like, consistency is greater than intensity.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get that. We need to get a sticker done. She should have a sticker done, and we would buy those and give those to people.
Yes. So
anyways, just a really good practical episode. And I think we need those because we talk a lot about just some soul stuff and thinking and just your perspective, but this was just really practical and helpful.
Really practical. Yeah. Across life, certainly in fundraising, but across life.
Great.
Yeah. And then talking about the soul, we had Mindy Caliguire on, the founder, CEO of Soul Care. And that was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
So good.
And very relatable because I think to a lot of us, because she starts by talking about the amount of stress that she lived under early in her life as a fundraiser, kind of under pressure, like always needing to do more to make ends meet. And in her case, so just a quick summary, in her case, she and her husband, little to no training or support. And I think they felt the ramifications of that throughout their early years of service. And then Mindy reflected on her youthful plan of attack, right? When you're young, you can get anything done. I think I'm old enough to realize that's not possible as I hit the hay earlier and earlier every single night. Seems like, but the plan was apply more effort, work harder,
right?
And basically, she kept going and going and going until her own body retaliated and shut down.
Yeah, I really appreciated her candor and just the example she set. And like, hey, you do not want to do this.
Right.
I appreciate that her company continues to come alongside people with really helpful resources, and a lot of those free. Yeah,
and I appreciated this the practical approach. Like, how do you what is soul care? What is a soul? Give us some framework and some schema to hang our thinking on when we're talking about the soul. And I love that she focused on like a healthy soul isn't about like the behavior necessarily or the achievements.
Yeah.
So like the quiet time, the scripture memory. If I get a master's of divinity, if I have a clean house, then my soul is going to be healthy.
If 10 people come to know the Lord.
Right.
Yeah.
It has more to do with our rootedness in the vine. And it's not that those things aren't good. They obviously are. But if that's the focus versus just him, Jesus, it's actually not as helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then we talked with Rebecca C.
Yep.
She is a certified Gallup StrengthsFinder coach. And that was a really fun conversation too, because I just think it's so cool to think about the way God has uniquely made us to move about the world. And I love that the emphasis of the StrengthsFinder is to just celebrate and like run well in the lanes that you're good at.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's counterproductive to try to be good in everything.
Right.
Although we feel like somehow we're failing to some degree if we're weak in some areas, but God hasn't designed us to be strong in every single area.
Yeah. We need community. And I think that's the really cool thing is that, leaning into your strengths and finding ways to apply those to the fundraising season and different tasks within then allows you to see, wow, I'm really not very good at that, or that drains me.
Yeah.
And to invite your core team to help with that, or other trusted friends, or your church, or your sending org. There's just, there's so many people that I think once you're empowered with the knowledge of what you do well and what you need help with, it then positions you to invite other people into that.
So good. And it really speaks well, I think, to one of the core tenets of Provisio, which is that fundraising is not a formula.
Nope.
There's not just one way to do it. And I think she struggled with forcing herself into a particular kind of mold, and that just wasn't working for her. And so when she was just like, I'm going to do it this way and lean into my relational strengths in her case, that's when things started to click.
Right.
So I think we need to, there are best practices, of course, but we also need to hold it loosely.
Yeah.
We keep beating that drum, but I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it strikes me that, when you're operating out of your strengths, you're probably able to operate a little more authentically because you're not encumbered by, fear or awareness of not doing it well or something like that.
Right.
And it's that authenticity and that genuine connection, I think, because of the authenticity that I think really does start to make it click, like you said. And speaking of authenticity, that was what our next guest talks to.
Good segue.
Yeah. Travis Cottrell, what a gift to spend time with him.
Absolutely. And I feel like everybody has to sacrifice to come and just spend time and be on the show. They're all busy. They all have full lives. But the main guy, the main worship leader for Beth Moore, taking the time to come and talk to us, that's top tier.
Yeah, and he was super prepared. It's not like we did not get the sense that he was just kind of fitting us in. He showed up with such intentionality and authenticity, which I really appreciated.
Yep, very down to earth. Yep. And it was interesting. So what stood out to me is it's interesting how he felt so much resistance in himself when he first started talking about money. And when he was working with some of these organizations that were asking him to be more deliberate with his fundraising ask.
Yeah, and I appreciated how he walked us through the way he dealt with that and kind of where he landed. And I thought that was really helpful.
So listener, if that's something that you are struggling with, not wanting to talk about money, like that just feels dirty somehow to you, this would be a great episode to jump into.
Yeah.
So it seemed like the moment of change, the linchpin moment for him was when he was invited to the field.
Yeah.
By Compassion, I believe it was. And to see like these are the children that we're helping,
and specifically meet the kid that he knew,
right? Which I can imagine.
Oh my goodness,
we support a child as well, and that would just I can put myself in his position there.
Yeah,
that would be massive. So it's fascinating that we as fundraisers need just as much vision as the donors. We need it for ourselves, just as much as the donors need it. So I think you can ask yourself, like, how can you cast vision for something that you don't see clearly yourself?
Yeah.
You can't just go through the motions.
Right.
So the critical element, and something I think we say often, is that the money isn't just to cover your expenses so that you can get to the real work of ministry.
Right.
Our finances are an extension of control. And we feel in control when we know where our money is coming from, and how much we have, and where it's going, and how long it's going to last, right? So giving, especially sacrificial giving, like Elijah's widow friend, for example, truly prompts us to release control. So that's the gift that we give when we ask somebody to partner with us.
Yeah.
And that's not insignificant.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I can say this, but it doesn't feel like it's ever the wrong move to position people to depend on God.
That's very reasonable.
So then we talked with Carolyn Kellum. She is the staff manager for MPD with Navigators. And I feel like she had some really great practical wisdom.
Another great practical episode.
Yep. Very practical.
Yep.
I think what I've heard most feedback from others regarding her episode was just their aha moment when she said that she just kind of stopped asking for 100 and started asking for 200.
Interesting.
Yeah. It like unlocked and they were like, oh, I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do we think that 100 is the ceiling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting that was an impactful moment for a lot of the people that have given feedback on that.
Yeah. I like that she also emphasized that she likes to ask for feedback and input from her donors, not just to make it a one-way stream.
Right.
Like it's more than me just feeding you information, but like, hey, what are you doing? Ask them questions, give them opportunities to share how they like to be involved and informed.
And she was the one that had the really fun quote about how donors are like caring for your teeth.
Yes.
If you take care of
Remind me
them.
what she said. Yeah.
It's something like if you care for them well, you'll have them for a lifetime.
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah. It's hard to replace your teeth.
Yeah.
It's hard to replace your network too.
It is. Yeah. All right. So then we had the Halligans. And
love the Halligans.
Love the Halligans. And actually I was re-engaging this episode in preparation for this time.
Yeah.
And something that struck me is I just really love, they have a very contagious joy.
I was thinking the same word, contagious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Seth laughed so much in that episode. And they both, I mean, Seth far more, but they both laughed and carried their story, which I know was a very hard story.
Right.
They actually carried it with, I don't know if levity is the word, but certainly it wasn't heavy.
No, right. Yeah.
And I think that just speaks to how much God kept them and how they see and have been provided for.
Yeah. Maybe to me, it comes back to that issue of control, how much they've experienced the Lord's provision in very, very challenging seasons of their life.
Yeah.
And like, if God can get us through this, we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I was actually talking to a friend the other day about how I really do believe there are seasons and events and things that happen that you would never wish for.
Yeah.
But then looking at them, you can't deny. You can't ever deny that God provided.
And the depth of character that forged in them.
Right. And the depth of insight into God's character.
Yes.
Yeah, which, again, it's like you don't wish for these things, but then, man, it's not wasted.
Yeah.
They had some really great advice for how to navigate challenging situations. And people face those. People face having to leave a country that they love or, an unexpected disruption.
And they spoke to something that I think is challenging for some people on the field, where they think that if I'm completely vulnerable and honest and I expose all my thinking and my doubts and my struggles to my network, they're going to drop me. They're going to have these doubts. I'm going to shatter this image that they have about me. And that was something that they were very real.
You're right.
Very authentic, very clear with, here's what we need. Here's our boundaries. Here's how you can help us. And their network, the body of Christ just came in around them.
Yeah.
And took care of them. And that's a beautiful picture of what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah. And actually, it was really striking to me that they said that they actually felt closer to people. Even people that live near them, they felt closer to them when they were in a support-based role because now they don't really have reason to overlap, even though they might live 5 miles down the road,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting comment that Seth made.
It speaks to the kind of the frailty, the weakness of kind of our independent natures as Americans.
Mm-hmm. But to your point about feeling like you can't be seen, that was actually a lot of the conversation we had with Amy Young, which was our next guest, episode 29.
Right. Those dovetailed.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, man, that was another good episode. I think that was really insightful.
Well, and when you have all the data.
Yeah, because for those that haven't heard that episode, Amy works for Global Trellis. Actually, she founded Global Trellis, which is an organization that equips and supports support-based workers all over the globe. And their organization put out a survey, and I think it was something like 350.
It was a lot.
Yeah. they had a lot of responses, and basically the survey just wanted to touch on, what are the things you feel like you can't talk about? And wow.
Transparency. Let's be transparent.
Yeah. The results were really kind of shocking in some ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Eye-opening. Did we post the results?
I don't think we posted the results, but I know people can access them through the Global Trellis resourcing. They should do that. Yeah. And if this is piquing your interest, I mean, we can't obviously talk about all those results in this context, but you should definitely give episode 29 a listen and go to the Global Trellis website.
Yeah. Especially if you're somebody even in church leadership or like member care, I think that could be really insightful for you. Really eye-opening.
Yeah. But something so kind of pertinent specifically to our conversation around fundraising, a couple of things that stood out were that people did not contribute towards long-term saving.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't really feel like they had a lot of resourcing around that. It also pointed out that a lot of people get into a situation where they do have to start utilizing credit to meet their needs, which just, if you're in a situation like that, we would love to come alongside you and help you kind of take some steps towards changing that reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I feel like there was some pretty helpful pieces of insight. And actually, we're working to get some people in the financial planning and long-term investing space onto the podcast for season 4. So I think that should be a really helpful conversation.
And I think just one thing I'll mention too, like the value of and the importance of educating your senders. If you have people that haven't done this very much, or like you're the first person that they've really supported, there can be a certain expectation or a certain picture of what you're doing that maybe is unrealistic and maybe a little glossy and shiny and, oh, you're so cool, I couldn't do this. But we're just church members living in a different part of the world. We're all missionaries. We're all doing missions. We're just in a different arena.
Yeah, so episode 30, I actually was absent for. I heard it. It was great, but I wasn't there. Yeah.
Well, and this was, we realized, I think, that we talk a lot about just long-term people that are doing fundraising and missions and ministry in a fundraising context for their lifestyle.
Right.
But that doesn't address people who are going for a short-term experience or for a summer or just for a few weeks or days.
I mean, I think there are a lot of principles in fundraising that carry over and just look a little different in the context of short-term.
Yeah.
But there's also some other considerations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it was important. Things that stood out to me really quickly here is to approach it with humility and with an attitude of worship. Again, not just about the money. And that's even more tempting, I think, when you see it as a small amount.
Right.
And it's like, let's get some sponsors really quick. But really continue to see it as I'm mobilizing the church and I'm building relationships. And even if you don't end up serving long-term, maybe you just do a series of short-term trips again and again and again for whatever reason, you're still building that momentum and you're building those relationships with people that aren't able to go and that can minister through you, alongside you through their giving.
And something that we talk about is that short-term fundraising can actually kind of be something not only for the fundraiser, but even for the donor, like a first experience that really sets the course for what this is going to look like, right?
Sure.
So as a first-time fundraiser, that experience, you have good training and that goes well and you have vision, that will probably set you up to be more likely to think, I could do that again. I would be willing to do that again. Much in the same way, if a donor, somebody that's not accustomed to giving, engages and gives to you
at a lower level, a small amount, maybe.
A smaller amount, and then they see like, oh wow, this person communicated with me well. I feel like I was part of this. This feels like it matters.
Right. The bug is planted.
Yeah, and I think it does really give them vision for what it looks like to continue to do that. So I think for both people, short-term fundraising can actually be a really sweet space of discovery and, when stewarded well, a great investment in further opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just a one and done.
No.
You need to see it as a bigger picture than
And
that.
honestly, if you treat it as a one and done, you might be doing harm to the next person that might ask.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. If you just get your money and run.
Yeah.
We don't have an adventure.
Yeah. Because even in short-term fundraising, gratitude is important. Follow-up is important.
Right.
You know, and
think about the people that come after you. Like we always we're on the trail. We pick up our trash. Like consider the environment that you're leaving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good.
So episode 31 was with fan favorite Josh Lindstrom of Woodman Valley Chapel.
Absolutely.
He talked about endurance in fundraising.
Yes.
And that was a great conversation. And it's memorable, just actually it was kind of an aside, but he started telling us about this practice that his church was doing and kind of taking like a Sabbath rest, I think every 7 weeks or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah, that was cool. That was inspiring.
And I still think about some of the things that he talked about with Elijah. Mm-hmm. And I've worked this into my coaching.
Cool.
Unashamedly. So when he talks about how the Lord had called Elijah to this widow, but he had also directed the widow to him. Like that word directed could be translated, he ordained that she was the one that he talked to. So it doesn't necessarily mean that she knew in advance at all that Elijah was coming or that this would happen in her life, but the Lord had set it aside and had ordained it. So that's, I think, convicting and also compelling that we as fundraisers need to walk through those doors, because those are the things that he has ordained. And if for whatever reason Elijah had said no, can you tell the Lord no? For the sake of argument, if he had said no, this woman then misses out on the Lord's provision. And that literally would have been her last meal. And then she dies.
She and her son.
And her son.
Yeah.
And so our obedience, his obedience in this situation averted tragedy.
Yeah. The other thing that really stood out to me from that episode, which I think we've talked about before, is just the emphasis on communicating with your supporters in a way that celebrates normal life.
Right. That was a good point.
Yeah. It doesn't all have to be these big, shiny, bow-covered stories.
Yeah.
Like watching your teammates' kids so they can go on a date. That is really meaningful.
Let's normalize those, air quotes, mundane acts of faithfulness.
Yeah.
That lead to fruit, even in small steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think really kind of from that conversation, some things that I think contribute towards endurance are resting, celebrating, which I would say that,
right.
Being grateful for the mundane is a celebration.
And then when people hear about us, like as we report these things in our communication, they're like, oh yeah, I've done these things too. And it kind of, it shrinks that perceived, I'm going to say power distance. I don't know if that, or the distance between a donor and a missionary. We're kind of the same. We're just in different places. And we have different focuses, but we're both doing work for the kingdom.
Although I do think, and he spoke to this too, that there are some real costs and difficulties in choosing to, live cross-culturally or live in domestic ministry in a total countercultural way.
Yeah, without ignoring that truth.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that's 100% true. And it's also true that it's not helpful if anybody starts to put the ministry worker on a pedestal.
Never helpful.
Never helpful.
And that goes back to Amy's too. Amy's like, I think people feel like they're on a pedestal, so they
have to measure up.
Experience the expectations and what does that look like? And maybe they don't even know the expectations. Yeah, that's a snowball waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so Callie Davis on spiritually healthy fundraising was the next episode. And this is one that I have used one of her stories again and again and again in my coaching. I just steal with zeal.
All right. I'm curious. Tell me more.
So she talks about in this episode a friend that introduces a certain number of donors to her, potential donors, and said, here's 10, 15 names, 20 names, whatever it is. I think you should reach out to these people. And she receives this list and she says, fantastic, these are potential new donors. And so she goes through the motions and she meets faithfully with each person. At the end of this season, I don't know how long it was, she's struck by the painful reality that not a single one of them were donors.
They all said no.
They all said no.
Yep.
And so she begins to wrestle with, like, Lord, what was the point of that? Did you make a mistake? Like, why did I have to talk to those people? And her conclusion was, ultimately, my bottom line, my resources, that wasn't the most important thing.
Mm.
There was something else that needed to happen in those discussions that was more important than the funding.
Yeah.
And so I love the emphasis on just celebrating a no,
Mm-hmm.
which is countercultural, counterintuitive, but such a healthy way to approach it. Like, assume if somebody says no to you, it's because they've said yes in other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And give them the benefit of the doubt. Such a healthy thing. So
yeah.
Wonderful.
And it's kind of striking. And guys, 100% easier to say than to like sit in what I'm about to say. But for kingdom people, no is never a threat.
Amen.
You know?
Yeah.
And again,
your future is secure.
Much harder to live in.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah. Yeah, I appreciated our conversation with Callie. I loved how down to earth she was, how generous with her thoughts. I do think that the spiritually healthy piece is so important. And I loved that she emphasized that and that their ministry really emphasizes that, because Callie actually works with Via Generosity, formerly SRS, Support Raising Solutions. They're kind of one of the leading
founding
names in this space.
Right.
And yeah, so she had a lot of really great things to share. That was episode 32, if you missed it or need a refresher.
Yeah.
Then we had a mini series.
Yes.
So episodes 33 through 39 were, and you missed this in large part.
Yep.
Myself and Jenn.
Which I think made sense.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And Jenn is a lot of fun. Yeah. So Jenn and I had the opportunity to speak with a variety of individuals from different backgrounds. We spoke with a young woman from a Hispanic background, a young man from an African-American background, and also a couple that he was from the Appalachia area.
Okay.
And she was Thai.
Yeah.
We didn't actually get to talk with her. Mesa was her name.
Yeah.
Because they had a sick kiddo, but her husband Jeremiah represented, and he represented well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then aside from that, we also had the opportunity to speak with an Asian American couple working in the Philippines, the Samuels family, which works with Wycliffe Bible translators. All around.
Very diverse group.
Yes, such a diverse group, such fun conversations, and really insightful. And I think what I loved and I'm taking away from those conversations is just, yet again, there's not a formula.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so helpful to just be dialed in and attuned to your cultural background and to really understand the best way of communicating and being aware of the value of time and presence and what is most helpful in terms of really trying to align vision with cultural values.
Yeah. And when you serve cross-culturally, there's a big emphasis on contextualization.
Yes.
Right? Like, you contextualize scripture. You like, how does this apply? There's a great book about the 3D gospel that talks about in the West, we emphasize certain things in scripture, and Asians emphasize other things, and Africans maybe emphasize other things, but it's important to contextualize that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important to contextualize your approach to fundraising as well. Mm-hmm. So if you're reading something like The God Ask, for example, and you're like, well, this doesn't fit my framework or my culture or my mindset, feel the liberty and the freedom to contextualize it yourself. Mm-hmm. And don't just throw it out and just scrap it and say, this doesn't work in my culture. Mm-hmm. It does work. You just have to tweak it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I think, really beautiful to feel like you can operate within the way God has designed community and relationship and all of that to work in your specific cultural context.
Yeah.
I was aware of a couple of things in our conversations. One is, with at least one of the conversations, maybe more, the situation was that the funding for ministry wasn't necessarily only support-based. I think it was Jeremiah and Mesa, where they actually had some tent making
Okay.
opportunity. And so part of their, financial profile came in through realty,
Yeah.
and then part was support based. I think you and I would both agree that we don't ever see it completely going away, that God provides for his people through his people in some way.
Right.
That might look different than it does today, but to some degree, I think that we can expect God's resources to move amongst his people.
Yeah.
And unless God has called you into an opportunity that is solely support-based, I think you can be free.
There's room for that.
Yeah, there's room for that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, a few of these conversations mentioned Funding Tribe, which is Tony Dentman's group.
Right.
And we love Funding Tribe.
Yeah.
We're big fans of Tony. And actually, he will join us on season 4 as well, which is exciting.
Foreshadowing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just appreciated that that's a resource that a lot of the people we spoke with had utilized and had found helpful.
Love it. And here's a couple of things that stood out for me.
Sure.
Here's something from Evangeline. She said, if we can trust God with our salvation, we can absolutely trust him with our livelihood as well as our children.
Mm-hmm.
And that stuck out to me because even today on my way into work, I was listening to a tiny little Advent podcast, the 4 or 5 minutes, John Piper. So even just hearing his voice, it's soothing. And one of his points was, he was like, if our eternities are insured, why are we so worried about what happens to us in this life? And his point was death, arguably the worst thing that can happen to us. If that's lost its sting, why not risk now? Why not in Christ dream of what is the most fruitful future that we can have? Why not take some steps of obedience? And what are we so worried about?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. And then also from Jeremiah, he pointed out, and we talked about this a little bit already, but I think it bears repeating, like, you have to be convinced in your own mind, he said, that what you're doing is really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you don't believe it, it's going to feel like you're selling something.
Right.
And that just has a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Mm-hmm. Even salesmen, I feel like sometimes, right? But like, consider the last time, for an anecdote, or consider this metaphor, like consider the last time you told a friend about something that you really enjoyed. So maybe it's a movie, a restaurant, a scenic drive, vacation spot. You most likely communicated out of the overflow of your enthusiasm. And the fact that you really want your friend to share that experience. You want them to have that experience too. So it's not about some kind of mind trick of getting yourself in the right place. It's about reflection. And you really need to reflect on your vision. Do you really believe in what God is doing in this part? And do you really recognize the need? Mm-hmm. And if your vision is coming out of that place, your work is done. You're not selling. You're just like communicating out of your heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And certainly there's still ways that you can improve skills of communication, but at the bare minimum, you need vision.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we concluded, we kind of wrapped up the content episodes for the season with Dr. Will Smallwood, which was a bit of a different episode for us. Yeah, because it was more
divergent.
Yeah, like a large scale campaign.
Yeah.
But I think I really appreciated his willingness to share his experiences, tough things he's had to work through.
Yeah.
And I remember him speaking to the importance of having a solid team behind him as he was doing this, which definitely carries over into, our purposes. Right.
Yep.
And honestly, just being blown away by what God will do when you're obedient to do your part,
Don't have a vision that's too small because you're afraid like God can't afford this. Right.
Yeah. And they really put a lot of work, it sounded like, into casting very specific vision for like, hey, this is part of what we want to do with these funds. And this is part of what we want to do. And this is why this matters. And this is why this matters. So it's also another episode that just speaks to the importance of the why and connecting people to the why.
Yeah. And that wraps us up.
That wraps us up. But of course, like you said at the beginning, all of these episodes had a recap episode that actually kind of had their own flavor. It wasn't just, sticking to necessarily point by point what the content episode had talked about. Like
their own insights as well.
Oh, yeah. And we had some great guests. I mean, I think of the Bissels, who are both coaches with Pioneers. It was really great to talk with them. Dr. Mandy, who's coming on season 4 as well.
Right. Shout out.
Yeah, super excited to have her on.
So for people who are curious about stats, who are numbers people, drum roll, everybody's gotten their Spotify Wrapped. So this is our version of that.
Yes. Yeah.
These are the stats, the top 5.
Yeah. I was a little surprised, not too surprised, but a little surprised.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so I'm going to do top 5, working down to 1. Okay.
Yeah, 5.
So number 5, episode 37, which was our mini series with Dennis and Evangeline Chow.
Awesome.
You referenced her quote.
Yep.
They are the couple living in the Philippines. So that was cool.
Awesome.
See that.
Episode 4, or in place number 4.
Episode 24 with Mindy Caliguire on soul care, avoiding burnout. I think that burnout is kind of like a culture, maybe a worldwide thing right now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are interested in hey, how do I not land there?
Yeah.
How do I keep my soul, Coming in at number 3 was Drew Rimke on partnership with the local church.
The first episode of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right. Number 2 was Spencer and Annette on You Should Get a Real Job. That was such a great episode.
Yes. And drum roll.
Number one was actually our episode with Dr. Smallwood and the 1,000 Days Transformed campaign.
Yeah. And so again, a little bit of a divergence for us. And I was a little bit surprised, but I think it speaks to kind of the unique insights that he had, and also just the gravity of the Cedarville orbit and that kind of stuff, which is not insignificant.
Yeah.
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 It's great.
And I should say that this is the top 5 in this season, not necessarily top 5 in
overall.
Right. In all the seasons. Because I tell you what,
overall,
that first episode with Josh Lindstrom on calling and stewardship remains our number 1.
Yes.
So, okay. Another fun stat. So according to Spotify, the most listened to episode. So this is out of all the episodes we've ever released. Okay.
So more than Lindstrom.
No, sorry. Let me back up.
Okay.
Okay. So according to Spotify, the most listened to episode this year was episode 3 with Steve Shadrack,
the patriarch.
So overall, all the years, it's Josh Lindstrom.
Okay.
But for this year specifically, it's Steve Shadrack.
People like Steve. That's great.
Well, who wouldn't like Steve? Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Also, I thought this was really interesting, so I thought I would include it here. According to Spotify, our top listeners are 25 to 29 years old.
That's awesome.
Yep. Followed by 35 to 44.
Also awesome.
Yeah. So the majority of our listeners are between 25 and 45.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about next year a little bit before we wrap up.
I am so excited for
cast
next
some
year.
Vision.
Andy, next year is going to be great.
And we know that because we've already recorded some of them.
We have. And they are such fabulous conversations. Yeah. So, okay. Before we get to the conversations and kind of what to expect on the podcast, for Provisio, we're actually going to be putting out another module on church partnership.
Needed.
Which is really fun. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a reason Drew Rimke's episode was in that top 5. Absolutely. I think people are really hungry for information on this. Yep. And so we are going to be putting out that curriculum and a podcast, trying to decide whether it will be a mini series or whether it will be kind of like a podcast with the module.
And who helped us write that?
Her name is Corey McKee. She is a longtime Provisio coach, and she is going to be helping with the podcast production as well.
Awesome.
Super fun. All right.
This one I'm excited about.
Yeah, you tell them.
I think we have a great system.
Yep.
But we are rolling out. We're not even rolling it out. We're still in the stage of like hammering it out, I'd say. But a new framework for the fundraising journey. So if you've already gone through it, you're not going to miss anything. But this is a new way to conceptualize how you approach fundraising, and we're going to use the hero's journey as a framework.
Yep.
So
Pretty interesting.
Yeah. So consider, I don't know, if maybe you don't know much about the hero's journey, but there are certain stages as you're telling a story. And I think those relate, and those can be connected to the fundraiser's journey as well.
Mm-hmm.
So things like the refusal of the call, certain obstacles, the hero meets a guide, things like that. You enter the cave, you face the challenge, you come back with the elixir, and you share it with people. So I'm really excited just to nerd out on that a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right. So on the podcast in the coming year, something we're excited about and producing currently is a series on soundtracks. Basically looking at the ideas we believe and how that shapes the way we act and kind of like forms the way we show up. That one's been really interesting. We're excited about that.
Yep.
And I guess just to give you guys a real specific sneak peek, we mentioned a name earlier, the name Mary Valloni. Mary is a delight. She just released her newest book with Mike Kim called Fully Funded, released in October of 2024. And Mary is kicking off season 4 for us.
And she has a wonderful podcast as well.
She does. Yep. Actually, she has several podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go check her out.
Yeah. So that's the way we're going to start season 4 in the new year. And I tell you what, Andy, I'm looking back on 2024 and I'm just thankful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this was a great season. Lots of great guests. And listener, we hope that you have found it helpful. And we look forward to bringing you more helpful content in the new year.
That's right. We'll see you soon. It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.